On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. That moment gave the United States its greatest victory in the space race and permanently changed how the Cold War was remembered. But what if America had lost? What if the Soviet Union reached the moon first? Our alternate history begins in 1966. In our timeline, the Soviet lunar program was divided between rival designers, secretive government agencies, and competing rocket projects. Their enormous N-1 moon rocket repeatedly failed. But in this timeline, Soviet leaders make a crucial decision. They place the entire lunar program under one unified command. The best engineers are forced to work together. Funding is increased, testing becomes more organized, and the N-1 rocket finally works. In early 1969, an unmanned Soviet spacecraft successfully circles the moon and returns safely. The United States realizes the Soviets are closer than expected. NASA rushes Apollo 11 toward launch, but the Soviet Union gets there first. On June 25, 1969, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov steps onto the lunar surface. He plants the red Soviet flag, raises his hand toward the camera, and declares that the moon belongs not to one nation, but to all workers of the world. The footage is broadcast across the planet. For the Soviet Union, it is the greatest propaganda victory in history. For the United States, it is a national humiliation. President Richard Nixon still orders Apollo 11 to continue. Less than a month later, American astronauts also reached the moon. But history remembers them as second. The psychological impact is enormous. The Soviet Union has already launched the first satellite, sent the first human into space, completed the first spacewalk, and now landed the first person on the moon. To millions of people, communism appears to be the system of the future. Soviet influence grows rapidly across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Newly independent nations seek economic aid, military support, and scientific partnerships from Moscow. The United States responds by doubling down. Congress expands NASA's budget instead of cutting it after Apollo. America begins building permanent orbital stations, larger rockets, and plans for a lunar base. The space race does not end in 1969. It becomes more dangerous. By 1974, the Soviet Union establishes a small research station on the moon. It holds only 4 cosmonauts at a time, but Soviet television presents it as the beginning of a new civilization. The base studies lunar minerals, tests long-term survival systems, and secretly installs military surveillance equipment. The United States builds its own base 2 years later. Now the Cold War has reached another world. Both nations claim their bases are peaceful. Neither side believes the other. Military satellites multiply in Earth's orbit. Space stations are designed to observe missile launches, intercept communications, and potentially attack enemy spacecraft. The superpowers begin testing anti-satellite weapons. A single collision could create enough debris to destroy dozens of spacecraft and cripple global communications. Meanwhile, ordinary life begins changing. Because both governments consider space strategically essential, they invest heavily in computers, robotics, telecommunications, solar energy, and lightweight materials. Satellite television spreads earlier. Weather forecasting becomes more accurate. Early navigation systems are available by the late 1970s. Primitive global computer networks develop years ahead of schedule, so scientists can communicate between space stations and control centers. But the Soviet victory does not fix every problem inside the USSR. Its economy still struggles with shortages, corruption, and inefficient factories. Maintaining a lunar base costs enormous amounts of money. The Soviet government hides these difficulties behind spectacular space achievements. Each new mission becomes proof that the system is working, even when daily life says otherwise. Then, in 1983, the moon nearly becomes the site of the first battle in space. A Soviet surveillance satellite suddenly fails near the American lunar base. Soviet commanders accuse the Americans of destroying it. American officials claim it malfunctioned, Both sides placed their lunar crews on alert. Cosmonauts and astronauts who once trained as scientists are ordered to prepare for armed conflict. For several days, Earth waits to see whether World War III will begin on the Moon. The crisis ends when engineers discover that the satellite was destroyed by a mechanical failure. But the incident forces both superpowers to sign the first major treaty banning weapons from the lunar surface. By the late 1980s, the Soviet economy is approaching collapse. In our timeline, the USSR dissolved in 1991. In this alternate world, its space program gives the government something powerful to rally around. The Soviet Union still faces unrest, but instead of collapsing completely, it reforms into a looser federation. Several republics gain greater independence while remaining connected through military, economic, and space agreements. The Cold War slowly fades without a clear American victory. By the year 2000, permanent settlements exist on the Moon. American, Soviet, European, Japanese, and Chinese crews work in separate bases connected by underground transport routes. Humans are preparing for missions to Mars, but the political map of Earth is completely different. The United States is still powerful, but it never experiences the confidence of winning the Cold War. The Soviet system survives in a weakened, reformed form, and space exploration is not treated as something humanity briefly attempted in the 1960s. It becomes the central battlefield, laboratory, and symbol of the modern age, all because one Soviet cosmonaut reached the Moon a few weeks before America. So, would a Soviet victory in the space race have pushed humanity deeper into space, or brought the Cold War dangerously close to the Moon? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this alternate history scenario, subscribe to What If for more stories about how one change could completely rewrite the world. Thanks for watching.